As scientists learn more about the dangers of forever chemicals known as PFAS, we're investigating their presence here in Montana. We recently detailed how PFAS flushed from our homes and businesses concentrate at wastewater treatment plants. The resultant sludge or biosolids are often used as fertilizers on farms or turned into garden composts sold at retail stores. PFAS tests in our last investigation revealed high levels of the chemicals in biosolids and composts used to grow food across the nation. The obvious next question, are these forever chemicals making it into our food supply? Montana PBS's Anna Rao investigates.
Do you want a little bit, Bea?
Missoula mom Allison Reinchess does everything she can to keep toxic chemicals out of her home and away from her 2 teenage children.
Not only do they harm us and our kids and our pets, but they also make their way into the water, into the air, into the soil.
Reinchess is so concerned about pesticides in particular that she founded Grow Safe Non-Toxic Missoula, a group of like-minded moms who push for organic land management.
How familiar are you with PFAS?
I am familiar with them primarily in the context of pesticides and the fact that some pesticides, a decent percentage of them, I believe it's around 15%, the active ingredient itself is a PFAS.
PFAS is short for per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. It's a whole family of chemicals, over 10,000 of them at last count. But they all have one important thing in common, a chain of nearly unbreakable carbon-fluorine bonds.
They're a very versatile, very useful chemistry.
Dr. Anna Reed is a senior scientist with the Natural Resources Defense Council, and she holds a PhD in developmental biology.
They can be used as lubricants and surfactants, and then they can be made into polymers, kind of like a plastic material, to make Teflon, to coat our nonstick pans.
For nearly 80 years, PFAS have been added to almost everything: waterproof clothing and outdoor gear, stain-resistant carpets and upholstery, makeup and personal care products, packaging and plastics, even dental floss. But all that convenience has come at a steep price.
Unfortunately, because they are man-made, there's a chemistry that doesn't have a natural way of breaking down in our environment. So they're actually most famous for being called forever chemicals because they are estimated to last in the environment for hundreds of thousands of years.
You already have that persistence, then you add more, and you add more, and you add more.
Laura Orlando is a senior scientist at Just Zero, a group that promotes clean, zero-waste policies. And she's also an adjunct professor at the Boston University School of Public Health. Orlando says PFAS are not only persistent in the environment, they persist and accumulate in the human body too.
It's really, really, really frightening for that reason.
Recent lawsuits revealed the companies that produce PFAS have known about their dangers for decades. This 1978 internal memo presented in congressional hearings shows scientists with 3M warning the PFAS chemicals they tested should be regarded as toxic and that all reasonable steps should be taken immediately to reduce exposure of employees to these compounds.
They affect multiple organs and systems in our bodies. We think of them as systemic toxicants.
They negatively impact our immune system, our reproductive system, our endocrine system.
High cholesterol, infant birth weight, low birth weight, impaired immune response to childhood vaccines, increased risk of preeclampsia and high blood pressure in pregnancy, cancer, specifically kidney and testicular.
It makes me feel like crying, honestly, when I hear those lists. It's so deeply wrong. It shouldn't be allowed.
Are there any PFAS that you know of that are safe?
No. So there has not been any PFAS that's been studied that has been shown to be safe. In fact, any PFAS that has been well studied has been linked to health effects.
What's worse, recent studies are showing even extremely small concentrations of PFAS are enough to cause harm.
Where we're at right now is we know there's no safe level.
Based on the research, the Environmental Protection Agency recently announced extremely stringent, legally enforceable limits on a handful of different PFAS in city drinking water supplies, allowing only 4 parts per trillion.
The drinking water limits alert us to the harm caused by this class of chemicals at very, very low concentrations.
The EPA set the extremely low drinking water standards with the most vulnerable population in mind.
Kids are uniquely susceptible to toxins. Relative to their body weight, they eat, I think it's like 2.5 times more than adults. They drink way, way more water than we do. They breathe 2 times faster than we do. So all of the sources for ingesting toxins go way up.
So the EPA's focus on drinking water is a good start, but there's another potentially serious route of exposure for children and adults where water and food directly intersect. Wild-caught fish from rivers, lakes, and streams across the nation.
Do you guys fish?
My husband's a big fisherman.
Do you guys eat the fish?
We eat the fish some of the time, right? Because there's a lot of catch and release, so he catches and releases a lot of the time. Yeah.
Over the past 16 years, the EPA has done 3 rounds of fish tissue testing across the United States. And each time, the agency has found astronomical levels of a dangerous PFAS known as PFOS in fish, including 283,000 parts per trillion in fish samples from West Virginia, 135,000 in Kentucky, and 127,000 in Tennessee.
The last I looked, there were 14 states with fish advisories. And so it's this particular area of our food system that is in jeopardy.
Do you need an industrial producer of PFAS to contaminate?
Unfortunately, you don't necessarily need to be near an industrial site to be getting PFAS contamination.
For anyone who believes Montana, as a rural state with no manufacturing of PFAS, is immune to highly contaminated fish, the EPA fish tissue results are sobering. In the 2014 round of tests, the EPA found brown trout in the Stillwater River and the South Fork of the Musselshell with more than 23,000 parts per trillion and 11,000 parts per trillion of PFOS, respectively. They also found catfish in the Yellowstone River with 53,000 parts per trillion. However, the most contaminated samples were catfish pulled from the Missouri River, where the EPA saw concentrations of 76,000 parts per trillion of PFOS. Remember, the EPA limit for PFOS in drinking water is just 4 parts per trillion.
Wow. Wow.
And 53,000.
Wow. Missouri River. Wow.
How do you feel about that and maybe eating some of these wild-caught fish?
It makes you feel like you should never eat these fish.
I personally, as a mom, would not want my child to eat a fish that's that contaminated. We have a hard time eliminating PFOS from our bodies. So that one fish, that amount of PFAS that they're eating will stay in their bodies for, 5-10 years.
We know from the EPA's results nationwide that like 91% of the fish tissue caught nationwide has some detection of a PFAS.
Abby Ebert is a senior water quality monitoring scientist with the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. The DEQ and Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks have been doing more research. They recently tested water and fish across the state, sampling from 13 different lakes, rivers, and streams.
We are currently sifting through all of the fish tissue and surface water data that we collected. We just recently got that full data package, and also with that, we're just kind of looking at overall toxicity of our results right now.
The DEQ won't be ready to release that data and any potential new fish consumption guidance until the fall.
If we don't have these big point sources of contamination, right? Why are we seeing it so high in some of these fish?
I'm not quite sure. We haven't done full ecological or source assessments, so we don't even really know where all the PFAS is coming from.
And when regulators don't know where it's coming from or how much, it's hard to know how widespread the problem is. Indeed, concerns over PFAS in our food supply go way beyond wild-caught fish. What about the food grown on farm fields where PFAS-laden biosolids have been applied? What about the food we buy in grocery stores every day?
We do know that there are studies that show PFAS in food, and we just don't know how pervasive it is because we haven't done systematic testing in the way we have for drinking water.
Dr. Reed says shorter chain PFAS tend to accumulate in crops, leafy greens like kale and lettuce, while longer chain PFAS tend to accumulate in proteins like beef and seafood. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has done limited random testing for PFAS in the domestic food supply since 2019 as part of its Total Diet Study Program. At first, the FDA's results look reassuring. Almost all foods show up as non-detects for various PFAS, but you need to look closer at the method detection limits. Critics have said the method detection limits the FDA is using are too high. For instance, the method detection limit for PFOS, the known dangerous PFAS chemical the EPA says shouldn't exceed 4 parts per trillion in water, is set for 21 parts per trillion in the FDA's tests. So a non-detect under those limits doesn't necessarily mean there is no PFOS present. In fact, it could be present at 5 times the levels set for drinking water.
Ideally, we'd want to improve those testing capabilities and test at lower limits so that we can better understand what we're dealing with in terms of people's exposures.
The FDA did find enough PFAS in seafood samples to conduct a more targeted study in 2022, and the results were surprising. 74% of the seafood they tested contained at least one PFAS, including samples of clams, crab, cod, and tuna. Perhaps more concerning, independent studies of leafy greens have found far more PFAS contamination than the FDA. In 2023, researchers with the Alliance for Natural Health found PFAS contamination in 7 out of 8 random kale samples purchased in 4 different states across the nation.
Do you think the FDA is doing enough?
I think the FDA could monitor for PFAS in food more comprehensively.
Montana PBS wondered, what would we find if we tested groceries from a store that's part of a national grocery chain here in Missoula? We decided to test canned tuna, pork chops, cod, and kale. We purchased several versions of each item and mixed them together as one sample. This allowed us to stretch our testing budget and look for any contamination that might be occurring across several samples of the same food. The results? The canned tuna and the pork chops both came back as non-detects for the 40 different PFAS we tested for. The cod came back positive for 1 PFAS. It was over the method detection limit, but under the reporting limit. That means there could be anywhere from 123 parts per trillion to 389 parts per trillion in the cod. The real surprise, however, was the kale.
So we don't know if it was the organic or the non-organic. We don't know what brand, but if you check and see what happened on the next page.
Oh, wow.
This is over 500 parts per trillion in that kale.
It's a little unsettling, right, to not know what you're getting when you buy food and whether or not you don't have an issue or you're buying some kale that you think is healthy and it has, over 500 parts per trillion of PFAS in it.
Dr. Reed says, unfortunately, we don't know if that PFAS came from the food packaging and processing or the food itself.
What does it say about the fact that we were able to go to a grocery store chain that's in 34 states, buy several products right off the shelves, and find PFAS just right there? We bought it locally.
It is concerning. It doesn't fit necessarily the trend that we've been seeing with the Total Diet Study that the FDA is conducting, that 1 to 2, 3% of the food that you just buy off the shelf is contaminated with PFAS, but you tested 4 things and found PFAS in 2. It just really shows that we are not doing a very good job of testing our food.
Dr. Reed believes we will see more and more PFAS in our food supply because there's so much in our environment, it's literally raining down from the sky.
We're finding PFAS in snow in the Arctic, in rainwater across the globe.
Studies are showing that in some places, rain and snow contain more PFAS than the EPA's drinking water limit. We wondered how much might be in Montana's rain and snow. We took a composite sample of snow from the top of Lolo Pass, and we captured rain that fell over Missoula during a storm this spring. We were hopeful that there wasn't enough PFAS near Montana to contaminate our rain and snow. We were wrong. The snow results were small, showing just over a half a part per trillion of one PFAS. The rain sample, however, was shocking. The lab found 3 different PFAS that together totaled more than 3 parts per trillion, just in the rain falling over Missoula. 2 of the PFAS the lab found in the rain sample, PFOS and PFOA, are some of the most studied and most concerning PFAS at this time. Together, they totaled 1.57 parts per trillion. While that does not surpass the EPA's drinking water standard, Dr. Reed says it's a wake-up call.
To have PFAS show up in rainwater or snow kind of all over the world, especially not near contamination sources, I would think of it as a sentinel for the general contamination we're facing.
So no state and no person is immune, not when it's in our fish, our food, and even our rain and snow.
Let's stop making this stuff. We really, really need to turn off the spigot.
We do not typically see industry acting as the leader for positive change without public pressure. We have to keep that pressure on, even if it shouldn't be our job.
For Impact, I'm Anna Rao.
3M recently announced it is phasing out production and use of PFAS, while numerous states have moved to ban the chemicals from products where they're not considered a critical use. Critical uses include medical devices, semiconductors, and electric vehicles. The DuPont company continues to manufacture PFAS.